I know. We power scale the Primarchs and their gene sons, the Space Marines, way too much on this channel. But finally, yes, finally, we are diving into a Xenos race. I have no idea why it took me nearly 10 months to actually power scale a Xenos, but here we are. And hey, if this video does well enough, maybe we'll keep the streak going with the Eldar or even the Tau. You know what? Screw it. I've got a challenge for the herd. If this video gets 1,000 likes and 250 comments in the first week, I'll power scale whatever Xenos race or character has the most likes in the comments. Drop who you want to see next so we can try to avoid, yet again, power scaling the Primarchs.
Do it.
In today's video, we're talking about the Krorks. No, not those green hooligans you know and love, but their ancient, meaner, smarter, and way more terrifying ancestors. The Krorks were predators engineered for war as they tore through the galaxy in ways modern orcs couldn't even imagine. We'll break down who the Krorks were, what feats and powers they had, and most importantly, how they stacked up against the rest of the 40K universe. As always, my favorite bovine, it's time to power scale. So what do we actually know about the Krorks? The short answer is not much. They're one of the unknowns in 40K that only show up in fragments and are barely hinted at in the lore. But we do know just enough to paint a terrifying picture of just how insane these guys were. The Krorks were a warrior species created by the Old Ones millions of years ago during the War in Heaven. If you're familiar with the 40K timeline, you'll know this was the galaxy-spanning conflict, fought well over 60 million years ago before the current setting. On one side, you had the Old Ones, near godlike beings who uplifted half the galaxy. On the other, you had the Necron tier, who sold their souls to the star gods known as the Catan and became the immortal Necrons. Now, this whole conflict started because the Old Ones didn't cure the Necron tier of their cancer, which turned out to not be the greatest decision by the Old Ones, seeing that later these same Necrons would have the technology to nuke solar systems.
I made a huge tiny mistake.
But that's a tale for another day, since I know if I continue right now, 10 minutes will go by with me discussing random War in Heaven facts, and that's not the reason you clicked on this video. So back to the Old Ones. They were masters of genetic engineering, and when they realized the Necrons and the Catan were a threat, they started pumping out bioweapons. One of those bioweapons were the Krorks. Created alongside other psychic powerhouse races like the Proto-Eldar, the Krorks were designed to be the muscle, living weapons of war built to smash apart the immortal metal legions of the Necrons. And smash they did. The Krorks were titanic, with their speculated height to be around 40 feet tall. For comparison, Ghazghkull Thraka, the biggest modern orc boss, is only about 20 feet tall. Yeah, these guys could have been elite in the NBA. The Krorks were also incredibly smart. Smart enough to build and wear crude exoskeletons that were described as being more advanced than even current Imperial power armor. So, where did these guys go? Well, that's where things get pretty darn tootin' murky. We know that modern orcs are probably their descendants, but the exact fall from galaxy-wrecking super soldiers to the lovable fungus football hooligans we have today isn't really clear. There are, of course, some theories. First, genetic degradation. The Krork may have been a rushed job by the Old Ones. Without proper maintenance, their genome glitched out, and the race eventually devolved into the dumber, smaller orcs we know now. Only occasionally do Krork-level orcs emerge, like during the War of the Beasts or possibly in Ghazghkull Thraka. The second possible theory is Eldar interference. After the War in Heaven, the ancient Eldar may have seen the Krorks as too dangerous to leave alive. Wiping out the more powerful Krorks and letting the spores reset the race from scratch could explain the decline. The third and final possible theory is Necron or Catan meddling. Considering the Catan were literal star gods who ate suns for breakfast, it's not out of the question that they tampered with the Krorks to blunt the Old Ones' weapons. Whatever the cause, today's orcs are just the degraded remnants of that original bioweapon, shadows of the galaxy-shaking juggernauts they once were. So with that context set, let's finally break down what feats and abilities we can actually pin on these big green nightmares. This is where things get a little bit difficult and controversial as hell. We are going to be doing a lot of theoretical work here. Since we don't have a full stat block on the Krorks and Games Workshop isn't about to hand us a neat little codex on what they're capable of. Thus, we will be relying on the lore crumbs we do have to piece together just how powerful they were. Let's start with calculating their power, strength, and speed. Remember folks, these creatures are 12 meters tall, or in simpler terms, 40 feet tall. We see this in the book Fabius Bile, Clone Lord, as apparently he has a Krork in one of his experimental stasis chambers. That is the largest orc I've ever seen, Savona murmured, staring up at the towering 12-meter tall monstrosity that loomed in a nearby nook. And his weaponry. The frozen creature wore a crude exoskeleton far in advance of anything the orcs might now conceive of. Indeed, from his initial examination, Fabius suspected that it might be advanced of his own battle plate. That alone tells us a lot. So if these fellows are 40 feet tall, that means they are the size of a 4-story building or the larger classes of Imperial Knights. And unlike Knights, the Krorks are not slow, clinking war machines. They are most likely fast enough to keep pace with the Eldar, who are usually described as inhumanly quick. Second, the Krorks were intelligent. Like I stated earlier, they were smart enough to design and wear power armor better than the kind Heresy-era Space Marines were rocking. Sure, it was described as crude, but it was still more advanced than Imperial power armor. That means they had brains, at least by orc standards, brutal and gunning. Now the closest thing we've seen to a true Krork in modern lore is the Beast from the War of the Beast in M32. For those unfamiliar, the War of the Beast was the single largest orc invasion in the history of the Imperium, so massive it nearly brought down Terra itself. This Wog wasn't just big, it was the biggest the galaxy had ever seen, eclipsing even the infamous Ulanor Crusade that Horus and the Emperor had to bring down. I won't spiral too long into the War of the Beast details here, because it deserves its own video, but the key takeaway is the Beast himself, as the Beast was something else entirely, something closer to what the old ones originally intended. And even more insane is the fact that he went toe-to-toe with the Primarch Vulcan, one of the most physically indestructible Primarchs to ever live. Here's an excerpt from The Beast Must Die that really captures just how unstoppable he was. There really was no way to stop the Great Beast by any conventional means. Such power could not be destroyed, only diverted. Feeling the last gasps of breath escaping his body, Vulcan let his thoughts flow again. He reached out into the undiluting Wog, tapping in to that warp-born part of himself that had been for every Primarch both a blessing and a curse. He allowed his primal essence to mix with that of the orcs, his Emperor-forged body absorbing the surge of energy like a sponge. The Great Beast tensed, its thoughts shifting with tectonic slowness as it realized something was wrong. It tried to pull back the Wog to rip the power away from Vulcan, but it was too late. With failing strength, Vulcan thrust Doom Tremor into the face of the Great Beast and detonated the power field generator. That right there tells us two things. First, Vulcan couldn't win a straight-up fistfight. He had to tap into the Beast's own Wog energy just to level the playing field. And second, even juiced up on Orky Warp Juice, the only way to finish the fight was by nuking himself and the Beast together. And remember folks, the Beast wasn't even a full-on Krork. He was just a freakishly big orc, maybe on his way to becoming a Krork, but still an orc. Which makes me think that, hold on to your butts, that top-level Krorks might actually be stronger than a Primarch.
Oh, no, 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 no!
I know some of your faces just dropped to the floor with that statement, but let me explain myself. Side note before continuing, how fucking powerful was Vulcan when he was channeling the Wog? Like, it sounds like it empowered him in some degree, maybe enhancing his strength and speed, or maybe even just his general power overall. Sounds like a power scaling video of its own. Since I'm on the subject, I'm really tempted to do a ranking of every single Primarch across their various states. Base Primarchs, Demon Primarchs, amped moments like this. It would be a really long video, so I might make it a collab instead of just talking to myself for 5 fucking hours. If that's something you'd want to see, or if you know a fun 40k YouTuber who'd be down, let me know in the comments. But anyway, back to the Krorks and my outrageous statement. Let's set a baseline with the Primarchs themselves. Their power varies depending on the source, but a solid middle ground puts them at around or above city level, with some of them scaling to world level, with the exception being Horus Lupercal in his many balding forms, Magnus the Red, and Sanguinius during his stand at the Eternity Gate. That means lifting and smashing apart machines weighing millions of tons, moving faster than the eye can track, and tanking damage that would vaporize anyone else. But the thing about Primarchs is they're warp-enhanced demigods, with bodies that exist as anchors for Big E's genetic wizardry. When Ingron holds up Titans or Sanguinius blitzes entire armies, they're breaking the laws of physics through sheer warp field existence, which to your favorite cow means they could potentially scale far higher if they awaken more of their warp powers or psychic abilities, as seen explicitly with Sanguinius. But still, if Vulcan nearly lost to the beast, who wasn't even a real Krork, then by the most basic scaling, a genuine Krork, double the size, strength, and advanced armor, would be more than a match for any Primarch. If a Primarch is a walking Warhound Titan, then a Krork is a Titan with the savagery and cunning of a predator, engineered specifically to dominate wars. That might be kind of a bad metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. Now you can say that the beast must die is horrible and the writing throughout this book doesn't make any sense. And I would agree with you.
Well, this sucks.
But I still can't fight canon facts. If the beast, who was not even a Krork, was able to overpower a Primarch, it's simple power scaling, fellas. And remember where these big green boys fought: the war in heaven. The Krorks were created as a war machine by the Old Ones to fight the Necrons in the War of Heaven, the harshest, most brutal war in the history of the galaxy, with atrocities, acts of technology, and sorcery far beyond anything to have ever happened afterwards.
You're goddamn right.
The Necrons were an enemy that managed to drive the Old Ones to near extinction, the same Old Ones who at the time were the most advanced species in the entire setting. The armies of the undead machines wielding non-psychic technology beyond the Old Ones themselves were led by literal reality-bending gods, the Catan. Which means to me, if they were able to fight against the Necrons and their Catan overlords, they're pretty goddamn powerful. Before going further, I feel like I need to discuss their potential psychic abilities and generally just how the WoG psychic field works. The Krork are theorized to have their own enhanced psychic powers, surpassing the usual orc psychic phenomenon. This potentially could include powerful psychic abilities that could affect the battlefield significantly. Let's first talk about the WoG and how the orcs' psychic field actually works. In Warhammer 40K, all orcs possess a low-level psychic ability that contributes to what we call the Gestalt psychic field. This is the backbone of what makes the species so dangerous. The more orcs you gather in one place, the more raw psychic energy is generated, and that energy shapes reality to match orc belief. For example, if a few dozen orcs paint their truck red, it's not just style points, because orcs believe red ones go faster. I'm not kidding, that's literally how the lore goes. The psychic field bends reality enough to actually make it faster than a normal truck. That's the WoG in a miniature sample. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got ginormous space hulks crawling with orcs where they could literally stroll across the hole without void suits on. By all rights, they should be choking and freezing in the void, but because they collectively forgot they need to breathe, the psychic field keeps them alive. This is the WoG working on a massive, terrifying scale. Now, most orcs, though, can't consciously channel this energy. That's where the Weird Boys come in. Weird Boys act like psychic lightning rods, drawing in WoG energy and discharging it in a form of destructive powers. Anything from green fireballs to reality warping blasts. And here's where my personal cow theory comes in about the Krorks. Unlike modern orcs, Krorks may not have required Weird Boys at all. Instead, they could directly channel the WoG field through themselves without the need for intermediates. That means every Krork could, in essence, act as a living conduit of raw psychic force. Like, imagine an army of them, each one empowered not only by their strength and size, but also by the reality-warping energy of their own belief. That puts them in a totally different league compared to modern orcs. Today's hooligans can achieve frightening feats when their numbers swell, but Krorks? A massed war host of Krorks would fight with a psychic storm, enhancing their every strike, amplifying their resilience, maybe even reshaping the battlefield itself. If the orcs we know now can create miracle effects by accidents, then the Krorks would have been doing it deliberately as a built-in part of their biology and culture.
Well, that's just silly.
And this, in my opinion, explains why they could stand toe-to-toe with the Necrons and the Catan during the War in Heaven. The Krorks were simply walking avatars of a psychic engine, each one plugging directly into the Wog in a way their devolved descendants can barely begin to replicate. And this all brings us directly into the real question at hand: where do the Krorks actually scale in the brutal hierarchy of Warhammer 40K's most powerful beings? To answer that, we need to break them down into 3 distinct categories: the base Krork, the Wog empowered Krork, and finally a Krork warhost, and then measure each variation against the existing power benchmarks of the setting. Only then can we begin to place them accurately in the galactic food chain of monsters, demigods, and outright gods. I know this may be a little overkill, but you guys knew what you were getting into when you clicked on a Falling Cow video. So what are these 3 forms? We have base Krorks, who are titanic 40-foot monsters, genetically engineered war machines designed by the old ones as living weapons to fight the Necrons and their gods. They are physically stronger, faster, and tougher than even Primarchs, with regeneration, durability, and psychic resonance far exceeding what we see in modern orcs. Then we have Wog-empowered Krorks. Take their already terrifying foundation and amplify it with psychic synergy, weaponizing the Gestalt field in a way their degenerate descendants can't even fathom. Where orcs today rely on weird boys to channel power, the Krorks themselves can directly bend reality, making their strength and speed even more absurd, and their battlefield presence nothing short of cataclysmic. Finally, we have the Krork warhost, which represents a full nightmare scenario. Legions of Wog-empowered Krorks gather together, all feeding into and amplifying their psychic field simultaneously. At this point, we are no longer talking about soldiers or even titans. We're talking about a force of nature that can reshape reality on a battlefield-wide scale through nothing more than collective belief and raw power.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
That leaves us with a very interesting scaling conundrum here. Primarchs themselves in their base form already scale beyond greater demons and even avatars of the elder god Cain, which does give us a useful upper baseline. This means when we're talking about the Krorks, we are not dealing with anything resembling standard galactic infantry or even superhuman demigods. The Krorks sit in a category where sheer physical might, intellect, and psychic synergy combined to produce a level of power that could overwhelm the vast majority of known individual combats in the 40k setting. By raw one-on-one combat metrics, strength, speed, durability, and psychic output, a single Krork might plausibly defeat 1 or 2 Primarchs at the same time. In a broader battlefield scenario, a Krork warhost tapping fully into their Gestalt psychic field would likely overwhelm a Primarch-led force through a combination of brutal, coordinated physical strikes and reality-warping psychic reinforcement. Even the most capable base Primarchs, with all their inherent genetic advantages and warp-infused physiology, would find themselves outmatched against such a creature unless aided by extreme circumstances such as environmental advantages, tactical genius, or warp augmentation of their own. So where does that leave the Krorks? Primarchs are already titanic beings relative to almost every mortal or semi-divine entity in the galaxy. They are city level and may even scale to world level as they move faster than the eye can follow and tank attacks that would obliterate entire armies. To begin properly scaling the Krorks, it's crucial to establish what they are not. While the Krorks are absolutely titanic and terrifyingly powerful, they do not occupy the same tier as the truly godlike entities of the 40k universe. They are far outclassed by the multiversal forces, the Chaos Gods, and the God Emperor of mankind at the height of his power. These beings operate on a scale completely outside the universe. Their influence spans entire galaxies simultaneously. They manipulate time, reality, and probability, and they can destroy or reshape worlds with almost no effort. By comparison, the Krorks as physical and psychic war machines exist entirely within the boundaries of the material universe. Even if they bend reality to some degree through their shared psychic field, They are not multiversal, they are not eternal in the cosmic sense, and no amount of size or walk energy could allow them to meaningfully threaten a fully realized Chaos God or the Emperor of Mankind at his peak. Eliminating these entities from consideration immediately helps us narrow down the scope for scaling. Next, the remaining Apex tier entities against which the Krorks might reasonably be compared against include the Catan, the higher Necron lords such as the Silent King, surviving Eldar gods or avatars, and even the demon Primarchs. While Krorks were designed to contend with near godlike threats in the War in Heaven, they are still ultimately bound by the physics of the universe. A Catan shard, even in its fragmented form, can manipulate stars, unleash supernova-level energy, and twist reality locally on a cosmic scale. The Krorks would flat out struggle against this level of destructive output. Similarly, the Silent King and the other high-tier Necron lords wield planetary and system-level destructive technology that operates beyond conventional comprehension. The Krorks' psychic and physical powers would allow them to survive and perhaps even challenge some of the lesser manipulations or engage effectively in prolonged combat, but they can't threaten these entities on equal footing. They simply lack the skill of raw cosmic or multiversal manipulation. That said, the Krorks' ability to be even placed in comparison with these powers is kinda staggering. Most beings in the galaxy, Primarchs included, would never survive prolonged contact with a fully empowered Catan or a higher Necron Lord at the height of their power. The Krorks were once again designed to, and that alone elevates them into a conversation of the galaxy's deadliest entities. With these comparisons established, we can now scale the Krorks' main 3 states of power and see exactly where they land on the hierarchy of Warhammer 40K's strongest beings. We'll first start by scaling the base Krork. The base Krork, in my estimation, sits clearly above a standard Primarch, but below a full-on demon Primarch. Now, before some of you start typing in the comments how it's silly that the demon Primarchs scale above base Primarchs when the Khan, Sanguinius, or the Lion took them down, let's get this straight. Yeah, they did. They definitely killed him, but they were not winning straight-up bouts with them. It was more of a narrative or mechanical win in the lore. For example, Vulcan being a perpetual and Magnus the Red being an idiot, resulting in Vulcan killing Magnus. But if you look closely at that fight, Magnus kills Vulcan over and over and over again, and Vulcan only emerges victorious because of his perpetual nature. If we're comparing base stats, the Demon Primarchs and the base Primarchs, the Demon Primarchs on paper are supposed to be stronger than a base Primarch, with the only negative being them fully enslaved to the warp now. Demon Primarchs are not just stronger physically, but also granted warp-infused regeneration, the inability to truly die in the material realm, and the potent psychic abilities on top of their already monstrous Primarch stats. So in my opinion, that places the base Krork right smack in the middle. They're stronger, tougher, and more dangerous than any baseline Primarch, but they're not quite punching at full Demon Primarch levels, which is still a terrifying thought when you think about it. These things were engineered for the War in Heaven, a war that saw the Necrons in their prime, the Eldar were still a full-blown superpower, and the Old Ones were reshaping reality itself with psychic mastery. The Krorks were built to thrive in that environment, making them absolute monsters comfortably above Primarch tier. And if you need extra proof, just remember the Beast of Ulanor, who was almost a Krork, but not really. He was 10 meters tall, so that means he was still a solid 7 feet below a normal-sized Krork. And remember folks, he was still straight up overpowering Vulcan. That alone makes it easy to argue that a full base Krork would stand firmly above a Primarch. Then we get to a Wogg-empowered Krork. This is both a physical and psychic amp, stacked on top of the already monstrous base state. Remember how normal orcs get exponentially stronger just by believing harder? Now imagine that principle applied to a species specifically engineered to be avatars of the Wogg. That's the empowered Krork. At this level, they're not just over Primarchs, they're reaching into Demon Primarch territory, and in some cases, I'd argue they surpass the weaker or mid-tier ones. They're not over Magnus the Red, obviously, or maybe even Angron, but Fulgrim, Lorgar, Perturabo, and Mortarion have some rivals. I will say they don't have the immortality or warp nature of a Demon Primarch, but the combination of raw physical dominance and deliberate psychic channeling makes them a legitimate rival. This also explains how they could actually fight on equal terms with the Necrons and the Catan at their peak. Finally, we have a Krork warhost. This is where the scale stops being about individuals and becomes about armies. When Krorks gather in mass, their Gestalt psychic field would change the battlefield entirely. Whole planetary invasions could be tilted by their presence alone. Their weapons and tech powered by a shared psychic feedback loop that bends reality itself. In practical terms, a warhost could rival or even exceed armies led by divine champions. Think of it like an entire legion of demon Primarch tier beings fighting in sync. Their power scaling growing exceptionally stronger as their numbers grow.
What? What the fuck?
This is a living, breathing apocalypse designed to crash into cosmic horrors like the Necrons and hold the line. So to summarize it clearly, base Krorks are above Primarch level, but beneath all 6 of the demon Primarchs. Empowered Krorks are at or slightly above some of the demon Primarchs like Lorgar, Mortarion, Perturabo, and maybe Fulgrim, but definitely not Angron and Magnus, who would outright defeat them. And then we have a Krork warhost, an army scale nightmare that would devastate planetary or system scale conflicts through sheer psychic synergy. But even at their peak, they never ascended beyond those limits. They are not the Emperor, they are not the Chaos Gods, and they can't reshape the galaxy itself. They remain what they were designed to be, the ultimate weapons of a dying war, locked forever within the material universe. Of course, I have to stress this. All of this power scaling is highly speculative. We truly don't know how powerful the Krorks were, and I assume Games Workshop will never let us know. Everything I've laid out here is based on careful research from scattered lore crumbs combined with logical inference from orcs, Primarchs, and the Gestalt Wog field. Take all of this with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, I'm doing guesswork at its finest. That said, now that we've power scaled the big green boys, let's strap on some tinfoil hats and dive into a few of my favorite Krork theories. One I keep circling back to is that the modern orcs are basically a devolved echo of the Krorks, and the reason comes down to environment, or more specifically, what they stop fighting. Back in the War in Heaven, the Krorks were up against the most extreme threats the galaxy has ever produced. Necron fleets were glassing entire planets, the Star God Catans were bending reality like Play-Doh, and the Eldar, fresh out of the Old One's lab, were unleashing psychic storms that could annihilate armies before they even touched the ground. The Krorks had to be colossal, intelligent, and warp synergized just to survive in that crucible of cosmic scale warfare. But when the War in Heaven ended, the galaxy suddenly got a lot tamer. No more Star Gods openly flexing, no Necron armadas in every system, and the Eldar were focused elsewhere. Without these pressures, the Krork didn't need their peak adaptations anymore. Orky biology being what it is, always shifting to suit the fight, meant they gradually slimmed down, got dumber, and became the orcs we know and love today. Still deadly, still hilarious, but a far cry from their god-slaying ancestors. And here's where this theory gets extra spicy. I think the Eldar actively sped up that process. As they rose to galactic dominance, they almost certainly hunted down and purged any lingering Krorks before they could bounce back. That forced the survivors to adapt downwards, smaller, dumber, and easier to hide. Over millennium, the Krorks basically got nerfed by evolution and by the Eldar's extermination campaigns, which loops us into the bigger picture. Once the Krorks faded, the Eldar became the unchallenged rulers of the stars. Their psychic might was unmatched, their tech rivaled the old ones, and they could manipulate probability and time itself. The galaxy after the War in Heaven was shaped by the subtle dominance of the Eldar Empire, and honestly, that might explain why the Krorks never had a chance to come back. So my next question before we end this video is, will we ever see the Krorks return? That is the golden question. And my answer is, I think it would take a galaxy-shaking conflict on par with the War in Heaven to push the orcs back into Krork territory. We're talking full-scale, apocalyptic, god-tier warfare. Imagine if Abaddon actually succeeded in his Black Crusades, destroying the Emperor, wiping out the throne world, and ripping open a new warp rift in the heart of the galaxy. The Imperium would collapse, warp travel dies, and suddenly the stars are turned into a galactic feeding frenzy. Chaos runs rampant, the Tyranids descend unopposed, the Necrons wake up en masse, and in the middle of that madness, orcs. With the galaxy burning, that evolutionary pressure could kick back in, pushing them towards their original form. The Krorks are reborn. Would that be a second war in heaven? Yeah, it probably would be. It's not impossible. Chaos, Necrons, Tyranids, Eldar remnants, and the return of the Krorks, that's a level of carnage even the old ones would have nightmares about. Sounds like a good video idea. It's kinda crazy, I sat down to power scale the Krorks and somehow walked away with a few new video ideas. If you guys want to see the War in Heaven, the Eldar Empire power scaled, or any other Xenos race, let me know down in the comments. Gotta love it. Damn, the Xenos really are so much cooler than we give them credit for. But that does it for this video. Sheesh, them big green boys are different kind of broken. I know I said this Sukuna video would be next, but some good buddies came down to visit me, so that one will be coming out next week. Make sure to give it some love if you want to see more anime crossover videos in the future. On the next episode of Powerscaling Peeps, we'll be doing a very special video. We'll get to the Chaos Warband soon, but first, I've been wanting to do this video since I started making YouTube content. The Star Wars universe versus the Warhammer 40K universe. Which is stronger? And that one's gonna be so gosh darn fun to make. I'm already writing the script currently, and I am excited as a cow. Or am I about to have a cow? I don't know. Before I go, a huge shout out to my Patreon and YouTube membership subs. Ryania Basket, Ritter S, Soft Use, Omar, Keydri, Musty, Impossible Paul, and Nico149. You guys are amazing, and your support means the absolute world. I just updated all of my YouTube membership emojis, so if you guys want to comment a fun cow emoji, go subscribe to my YouTube memberships. And on the Patreon side, I've decided to start letting my Patreon subscribers select one video at the end of every month for your favorite falling cow to tackle. So if you guys want to be part of these growing communities, go check it out. One last thing before I go, my Discord is up and running, so if you guys want to come join the barnyard and chat and power scale silly characters with your favorite cow, come join. As always, my favorite milk drinkers, stay milked, and I will see you in the next video.